What if leaving the UK stops being a choice and starts feeling unavoidable? Not because of one disaster, but because daily life quietly tightens. Rent rises, wages stall, services thin, and the future feels harder to picture. People do not pack bags overnight. They calculate, compare, and wait for the moment when staying no longer makes sense. Across the country, that moment is arriving for millions at once. This is not a story about panic or prediction. It is about pressure building silently, decision by decision. The real shock is not who leaves, but how many feel they eventually must. Number 1. Housing becoming structurally unaffordable. Housing across the UK is no longer expensive by accident. It is expensive by design. Research on housing markets shows prices and rents rising faster than incomes for over a decade. Supply shortages, investor demand, and planning constraints have locked many households out of stability. As rents consume larger shares of income, saving becomes impossible. This pressure does not signal inconvenience. It signals displacement, forcing people to reconsider where they can realistically live. The impact spreads beyond cities. Studies on housing stress show families leaving high-cost regions for cheaper areas, only to face similar pressures there. Mortgage resets expose households to sudden payment shocks, while renters face frequent increases with little security. When housing absorbs too much income, choices narrow. People delay families, share overcrowded spaces, or move abroad where housing costs align better with earnings and quality of life expectations. Structural unaffordability changes behavior long before eviction occurs. Social research links sustained housing stress to migration planning and emotional detachment from place. Residents stop investing locally and plan exits quietly. Warning signs include rising vacancy turnover, increased temporary living arrangements, and declining long-term leases. Millions are not choosing to leave. They are being priced out gradually. When shelter becomes unstable, location becomes negotiable. By 2027, housing pressure alone could force large-scale relocation, reshaping population patterns not through crisis, but through accumulation of everyday financial strain that erodes security, confidence, and the ability to build a future within the UK. These pressures disproportionately affect renters, single-income households, key workers, and younger generations, quietly redefining mobility, stability, and belonging while turning relocation into a rational survival strategy for millions nationwide. Today, number 2, cost of living outpacing wages. Across the UK, the cost of living has risen steadily while wages struggle to keep up. Economic research shows real income shrinking once inflation is considered. Energy bills, food prices, transport costs, and council taxes now consume a larger share of household budgets. This leaves little room for savings or emergencies. When daily survival absorbs most income, long-term planning disappears, forcing households to rethink where and how they can live sustainably. Studies on household finance reveal a tipping point where pressure turns into action. Families cut back first, then rely on credit, and eventually consider relocation. Wages that once supported modest stability now feel inadequate. Dual-income households still struggle, while single earners face constant risk. This imbalance creates a sense of running in place, working more without progressing. People compare options globally and notice that similar roles elsewhere offer better purchasing power, accelerating exit considerations. Persistent cost pressure changes behavior long before financial collapse. Social research links prolonged financial stress to reduced community attachment and increased mobility intent. Warning signs include rising consumer debt, increased food bank usage, and shortened financial horizons. When households stop believing they can get ahead, location becomes flexible. By 2027, sustained wage erosion combined with rising costs could push millions to seek affordability elsewhere. This movement is not driven by ambition alone, but by necessity. As everyday expenses outpace income growth, remaining becomes harder to justify. The result is gradual population leakage, shaped by spreadsheets rather than emotion, transforming the UK's settlement patterns to thousands of individual decisions made under financial strain across regions, professions, and age groups nationwide today. Number 3. Job market polarization. Job market polarization is reshaping how people survive in the UK. Research shows steady growth in high-income roles, alongside expansion of low-paid work, while mid-income jobs disappear. This hollowing effect removes stability for teachers, technicians, administrators, and skilled trades. When career ladders break, progression stalls. Workers feel trapped between burnout and insecurity. A polarized market reduces resilience because fewer roles provide predictable income, benefits, or long-term security for households planning routes. Economic studies warn such imbalance accelerates outward migration among skilled workers seeking stability, affordability, dignity, and future opportunity elsewhere. Studies on labor markets show families respond quickly to polarization. Secure jobs vanish, replaced by contracts, gig work, or automation-exposed roles. This instability affects mortgages, childcare planning, and healthcare access. Younger workers adapt by remaining mobile, while experienced staff exit entirely. Regions with fewer mid-tier employers see faster population loss. Over time, cities lose balanced workforces, weakening local economies that depend on consistent spending and predictable employment cycles. Research links this erosion to declining tax bases and service strain felt across transport, schools, healthcare, housing, and community safety systems, locally nationwide. Polarization pushes relocation from necessity, not preference. Workers calculate risk rather than loyalty. When one illness, repair, or layoff threatens collapse, relocation becomes logical. Warning signs include shrinking middle incomes, rising underemployment, and stalled wage growth. By 2027, continued polarization may force millions to leave regions offering no stability buffer. This shift reshapes communities quietly, replacing permanence with transience and turning residence into a short-term strategy rather than a lifelong commitment. Economic pressure spreads unevenly, accelerating exits among families, renters, and mid-career professionals seeking security, continuity, planning, predictability, dignity, stability, survival. Number 4. Collapse of local public services. Local public services across the UK are shrinking under financial strain. Council budgets face persistent shortfalls, forcing cuts to transport, libraries, social care, and maintenance. Research in public policy shows service withdrawal reduces safety perception and daily reliability. When buses run less often, streets feel neglected, and response times grow longer, residents lose confidence. These losses are cumulative, not dramatic, yet they reshape everyday routines and expectations, especially for families, older residents, and lower-income households who rely most on shared services. Studies link declining services directly to population movement. When schools merge, clinics close, and youth programs disappear, households reassess long-term plans. Service erosion hits hardest in already pressured areas, accelerating exit decisions. People adapt first by limiting movement and spending, and by planning relocation. Over time, neighborhoods hollow as those with options leave, while those remaining face reduced quality of life. This imbalance increases strain on the few services left, reinforcing decline. Research shows service collapse becomes self-reinforcing when trust breaks. Warning signs include closed facilities, longer waiting lists, and reduced street presence. Residents stop engaging locally before leaving physically. By 2027, sustained withdrawal could force millions to relocate simply to access basics. This is not choice-driven migration, but functional displacement. When healthcare, transport, and safety weaken together, location becomes negotiable. Public services form the backbone of stability, and without them, staying becomes impractical. This quiet erosion pushes families, workers, and vulnerable groups outward, reshaping the population map through necessity rather than ambition. Over time, these pressures normalize departure, alter expectations of governance, and reduce national cohesion as mobility replaces settlement, leaving communities thinner, quieter, and increasingly dependent on external support systems for daily survival. Number 5. Climate risk-making areas. Uninsurable climate risk is no longer theoretical for many parts of the UK. Flooding, coastal erosion, and extreme weather events are increasing in frequency. Environmental research shows that repeated exposure to climate hazards changes settlement patterns. As risks rise, insurance providers reassess coverage. Premiums increase, excesses grow, or policies disappear entirely. When homes become difficult or impossible to insure, long-term residency becomes uncertain, pushing households toward relocation rather than repeated financial exposure. Insurance withdrawal acts as a powerful signal. Studies on climate adaptation show that people move not only after disasters, but after risk becomes financially unmanageable. Mortgage lenders require insurance, landlords pass costs to tenants, and property values stagnate. Communities facing repeated flooding experience gradual exit rather than sudden evacuation. Families calculate future risk, not past events. Over time, once stable areas feel temporary, reducing investment and emotional attachment to place. This process accelerates quietly. Warning signs include rising premiums, limited provider options, and increasing reliance on government schemes. Research links these signals to internal climate migration well before physical damage escalates. By 2027, expanding uninsurable zones could force millions to leave affected regions. This movement is driven by practicality, not panic. When protection disappears, location loses security. Climate risk reshapes housing, finance, and population distribution together. The result is not empty land, but thinning communities where staying carries constant financial uncertainty. As climate exposure spreads unevenly, mobility becomes a survival strategy, redefining where people can safely and sustainably live within the UK for future generations and households nationwide. This pressure alters planning decisions, discourages rebuilding, delays recovery, and accelerates permanent departure from vulnerable towns, neighborhoods, and regions across England, Wales, Scotland. Number 6. Remote work enabling permanent exit. Remote work has removed the final anchor tying many workers to the UK. Studies on labor flexibility show that location independence changes migration behavior dramatically. When income is no longer linked to place, workers compare countries by affordability, services, and quality of life. The UK loses its monopoly on opportunity. Skilled professionals realize they can earn globally while living elsewhere. This shift transforms relocation from risk into calculation, making permanent exit feasible without career sacrifice. Research following the pandemic shows remote workers relocate earlier in life and farther away. Families move for schools, healthcare, and space, while individuals chase lower taxes and stability. Digital infrastructure replaces physical offices as the main requirement. Cities lose residents quietly as leases end and contracts go remote. Employers retain talent, but communities lose people. Over time, this drains housing demand, reduces local spending, and weakens attachment to place. Remote-enabled exit reshapes national demographics without visible shock. Studies on mobility show migration accelerates when barriers fall. Warning signs include rising international relocations, declining commuter traffic, and underused offices. People do not wait for crisis. They leave when conditions favor exit. By 2027, remote work could enable millions to depart gradually. This is not abandonment, but optimization. Location becomes a tool. When work travels with the worker, staying requires strong reasons. Without affordability, services, and confidence, Departure becomes logical, permanent, and widespread across professions, ages, and regions. Households reassess identity, taxes, climate, education, and healthcare simultaneously, turning migration into planning rather than escape, a process reinforced by peer networks, online comparisons, and employer acceptance, which steadily normalizes leaving while reducing emotional friction associated with crossing borders for long-term settlement decisions across modern professional lives. Number 7. Declining quality of life indicators. Quality of life indicators across the UK are deteriorating in ways people feel daily. Research links access to healthcare, transport reliability, housing conditions, and safety perception to long-term settlement decisions. Longer waiting times, overcrowded services, and unreliable infrastructure increase stress. When basic systems feel strained, residents adjust behavior. They travel less, socialize less, and disengage locally. These experiences accumulate, shaping the belief that everyday life requires more effort than it should. Studies in social science show declining quality of life influences migration even without income loss. Missed appointments, delayed care, unreliable trains, and reduced green space affect mental well-being. Families reconsider raising children in environments where routine tasks feel difficult. Older residents feel isolated as services thin. Younger adults interpret friction as a signal to remain mobile. Over time, frustration replaces attachment, weakening commitment to place and lowering tolerance for future disruption. Warning signs appear quietly. People plan shorter horizons, avoid home upgrades, and delay long-term decisions. Research links these behaviors to rising mobility intent. By 2027, declining quality of life could push millions toward relocation, not for opportunity, but for relief. When daily living feels exhausting, leaving feels practical. This pressure spreads unevenly, affecting urban and rural areas differently. Yet the outcome aligns. Location becomes negotiable when comfort, safety, and reliability decline together. Quality of life acts as a multiplier. Once it drops below expectation, every other issue weighs heavier, accelerating population movement, driven by lived experience rather than headlines. These pressures influence decisions slowly, shaping conversations, expectations, comparisons, and choices until moving feels normal, responsible, and inevitable for households seeking stability, dignity, balance, predictability, and control over their futures. Number 8. Youth and graduate outmigration. Young people across the UK are leaving at accelerating rates, and the pattern is deeply structural. Education no longer anchors graduates to place. Research shows students increasingly view universities as exit ramps rather than settlement pipelines. After graduation, many relocate immediately, seeking stronger wages, affordable housing, and clearer progression abroad. When education feeds departure instead of retention, regions lose future workers before they ever contribute locally, weakening long-term population balance. Studies on graduate mobility show return rates remain low once young adults leave. Early career migration shapes lifetime settlement patterns. Graduates build networks, relationships, and assets elsewhere, reducing incentives to come back. This drains innovation, entrepreneurship, and civic participation. Cities invest heavily in education, yet export talent continuously. Over time, aging populations remain while youth density falls, accelerating demographic imbalance and reducing economic adaptability across regions. Youth outmigration spreads socially. Research shows peers influence migration decisions strongly. When friends leave, departure feels normal. Warning signs include declining student retention, fewer startups, and shrinking cultural scenes. By 2027, sustained graduate loss could force structural decline even in growing cities. This movement is not rebellion, it is calculation. Young adults respond to signals about opportunity, security, and future quality of life. When those signals weaken, staying feels risky. The result is quiet emptiness, driven by absence of renewal. Where cities function, but lack the generation needed to sustain growth, creativity, and continuity over time. Without young residents, demand for housing shifts, nightlife fades, services age, and political priorities change, reinforcing cycles that quietly push remaining youth toward exit, leaving fewer mentors, fewer innovators, and weaker intergenerational exchange across communities nationwide, over time steadily today. Number 9. Shrinking middle-class stability. Shrinking middle-class stability is becoming one of the strongest forces pushing people out of the UK. Economic research shows the middle-income group losing financial buffers that once absorbed shocks. Rising housing costs, stagnant wages, and higher taxes compress disposable income. Households that once felt secure now live month to month. When savings disappear, tolerance for risk collapses. The middle class historically anchored communities through spending, volunteering, and long-term residence. As that stability erodes, attachment weakens and mobility increases, turning relocation into a defensive response rather than an ambitious choice. Studies on social mobility show downward movement now affects professions once considered safe. Teachers, managers, engineers, and healthcare workers face rising costs without matching pay growth. This pressure reshapes decision-making. Families delay children, avoid home ownership, and cut community participation. Middle class. Contraction reduces local spending, weakening schools, services, and small businesses. As financial margins vanish, people plan exits earlier. Migration becomes a strategy to preserve status, stability, and dignity when domestic pathways no longer provide predictable outcomes. This shift alters identities and expectations across generations quietly, steadily, nationwide, over time, everywhere today. Research shows middle-class decline accelerates population movement before crisis appears. Warning signs include rising debt, reduced savings, and reliance on credit. When households lose buffers, staying feels dangerous. By 2027, shrinking stability could force millions to relocate, not for opportunity, but for survival. Communities lose continuity as long-term residents cycle out. This quiet pressure reshapes towns and cities into temporary spaces. Without restoring economic balance, mobility replaces settlement, and stability becomes something people search for beyond national borders, affecting families, professionals, retirees, regions, futures collectively, slowly, persistently, unevenly everywhere today in Britain. Loss of confidence in long-term security. Confidence in long-term security is eroding across the UK, shaping decisions long before crisis appears. Psychological and economic research shows people stay where they believe the future is predictable. When that belief weakens, mobility rises. Uncertainty around housing, healthcare, employment, and governance creates a background sense of instability. Even without immediate hardship, households begin questioning whether remaining offers safety, continuity, and opportunity. This shift affects renters, homeowners, and professionals alike, quietly undermining commitment to place. Studies on migration behavior show perception often matters more than reality. When people believe systems will worsen, they act early. Friends leaving, news cycles, highlighting decline, and visible service strain reinforce expectations. Families shorten planning horizons, avoid long-term investments, and keep options open. Confidence loss spreads socially, accelerating exits through shared narratives. Over time, communities thin not because conditions collapse, but because belief in improvement disappears. People do not wait for failure. They move when trust fades. Warning signs include declining home upgrades, reduced local investment, and hesitation around family planning. Research links these behaviors to rising immigration intent. By 2027, widespread loss of confidence could force millions to leave preemptively. This is not panic-driven movement. It is strategic withdrawal. When future security feels uncertain, relocation becomes rational. Nations lose people when they lose belief. As confidence erodes, residence turns temporary. The UK risks becoming a place people pass through rather than build within. Restoring stability requires more than policy. It requires rebuilding belief that staying offers safety, fairness, and progress over time. Without that belief, departure becomes logical, widespread, and permanent across regions, professions, and generations nationwide steadily. The reasons explored reveal a pattern driven by pressure rather than choice. Housing strain, rising costs, unstable work, service erosion, climate risk, and declining confidence interact quietly, pushing people to reconsider where they can live. None of these forces act alone. Together, they narrow options until mobility feels necessary. What makes this shift powerful is its silence. Families plan exits gradually, professionals keep income while moving, and communities thin without collapse. Absence appears long after decisions are made. This trend matters because population is the foundation of everything else. Schools, healthcare, transport, safety, and local economies rely on people staying long enough to invest emotionally and financially. When settlement turns temporary, stability weakens. The UK still functions, yet pressure is unevenly distributed, creating pockets where leaving feels rational. Awareness changes outcomes. Understanding the signals allows individuals and policymakers to respond before movement becomes irreversible. If this breakdown made you reflect on your future or community, take a moment to act. Like the video to support analysis, subscribe for updates, and comment with what you are noticing where you live. Your experience adds context others need. Watch the video to explore what could reverse these trends and how societies rebuild confidence.